Hi there, welcome to the latest episode of my 10-minute moan. The topic of this 10-minute moan is having a look at why protests 3 or 4 summers ago have been treated so differently in the United Kingdom to protests happening right now. So, you cast your mind back a bit to just after COVID, as we were coming out of the lockdowns, etc. And there was a gentleman called George Floyd, who was murdered in America. For those of you who aren't aware, America is a foreign country, okay? And there was a police officer charged and found guilty of his murder and is currently serving a jail sentence, if he's not dead already. And his death provoked a lot of an uprising with Black Lives Matter, protests, some violence. We had graffiti, etc., vandalism, all that stuff, looting. They like to looting the Black Lives Matter mob. There was a lot of that, and that transferred itself across to these shores, and we saw very similar actions, and we saw things like statues being pulled down, and people were arrested for that and found not guilty for doing things that were shared over social media, and everyone could see who done what. But these people were not to serve any prison sentences or be found guilty of any charges going forward. Now, at that time, the way the media, the way the police, the way the people running the country treated it is we must take these people's concerns on board. We must act on them. We must put things in place. We must take a knee. The police officers that went to the rallies, etc., were joining in the fun of the protests. Then we fast forward 4 years and we see 3 young girls, lovely wee girls, murdered by a knife at the hands of a man who also injured at least another 10 people, some of whom are still in hospital with their injuries. Excuse me. And that kicked off a series of protests which did lead to violence on the shores of the United Kingdom. But these protesters were dealt with very differently. Now, these protests were ignited by these horrific deaths. But the safety of our children, although it is a massive driver in the uncertainty of people and the fears that people have, it wasn't the only thing that drove these protests. These protests were driven by other fears, like lack of housing, 7-figure sums of immigrants coming into our country, a lot of illegal immigrants given access to the United Kingdom, a lot of people scared in their communities. So although there was, I would say the murders in Southport were the spark that ignited it, I don't think, horrific as they may be and as worrying as the concerns may be for the safety of our children, it wasn't the only thing. It was probably the biggest, to be fair, but wasn't the only issue. We saw just weeks before that, or I think it was 1 week before it, a soldier on the streets of the UK with his uniform on, easily identified as a soldier, and most countries would be treated with the utmost respect. He was almost murdered after multiple stab wounds by a big massive knife. Horrific attack. That was a concern that people had. We had a situation in Leeds where we had 5 children taken away by social services because they felt the kids were in danger. And the local community of immigrants there didn't like that, and they reacted with violence against the police on our streets. And then we had the story that came out in 2 parts. The first part of the story at Manchester Airport, we all saw the footage of a police officer kicking and stamping on a evidently Asian man's head. And then days later, we saw the footage that led up to that, where the 2 brothers had seemed to resist arrest and attacked 4 police officers, hospitalising 2 of them, breaking the nose of a female, and putting 2 female officers to the ground with their violent attack. That was what was happened immediately before the edited version, where we saw a police officer kicking a man who we were led to believe was cooperating. So that happened, and then unfortunately Southport happened. And then a couple of nights after Southport, maybe the night after it, we saw running battles by numerous, some people suggesting up to hundreds of youths having machete fights in the streets of the South End. So it was horrific. We saw some really terrible things in the streets of the United Kingdom, and these all add up together to give a lot of people a concern, major concerns about their own safety and children, etc., in the United Kingdom. But the way it's been treated by the police, by the media, and by those who govern their country, the people protesting, they've not to be listened to. They've been referred to as far right and fascists. And in some instances, we had a Labour MP, John McDonnell, suggesting that we should instigate an anti-Nazi league to fight these people. So now they're termed as Nazis. So quite strong language. But what's happened is, see this big bulk of people in the middle, the sort of central ground in the United Kingdom, they actually have the same fears as the people taking to the streets to protest. So when the police and when our government and when the media refer to people like that, where we're evidently not to listen to them, then that makes the people in this middle ground feel the exact same. They're talking to them as well as talking to the people who are protesting and causing some horrific scenes, if we're honest, in the streets of Britain. And I try to deal in common sense and logic most of my life, and I just can't see why, well, for these two sets of protests, sort of 3-4 years apart, been dealt with so differently by the police, by the media, and by those in charge of our country. When you take into account that the thing that drove the first lot of protests was the murder of a man who turned out to be a bit unsavoury, but in a foreign country, which has got nothing to do with us. And that found its way to these shores, and it was welcomed almost. When we have murder of 3 young children in our own streets, the people who react to it are treated so differently to the people who reacted to the death of a man in a foreign country, and was quite an undesirable man at that. And I can't compute that. That just doesn't make sense to me. But then I'm going to do a wee bit more research on this and do a video purely on the situation of Starmer and Starmer's previous history, when 20 years ago, before he was a politician, he made the Labour government accept that asylum seekers needed money from the British government as soon as they landed in these shores, and changed some of the legislation that we had in place. So this guy has got at least a 20-year history of how he wants to treat asylum seekers, legal or otherwise, because it doesn't differentiate in the legislation that gets passed whether somebody comes into the country legally or illegally. They've all to just be red carpeted. So this, the reasoning behind us having 2 totally different processes for 2 different types of protesters should maybe not be a surprise. But it worries me. Because if the people in the United Kingdom and the majority of this middle ground, if not all of this middle ground, feel persecuted, they feel as if nobody wants to listen to their concerns, then how does things get better? Because I can't see any day soon the police and the government and the media are turning around and saying, we called this one wrong. Now, I don't think Starmer's a stupid man, and I don't think he's guided by stupid people, but I think they made one massive error on how they decided to deal with us. And that was when he took to the stage to tell us how he was going to deal with. And he only described 3 incidents that happened in the United Kingdom, and that was Southend, London and Hartlepool, which were protests by the people he describes as right-wing and fascists. He totally ignored similar types of events in the streets of Manchester and in the streets of Southend. Sorry, I might have said Southport last time, Southend. And in the streets of Leeds. These issues with uprisings on in the streets of the United Kingdom were totally ignored by him. But these three that he totally ignored were things with the Muslim community in Manchester attacking a police station, the Romani community and Muslim community, I believe, joined them in the streets of Leeds, and what looked like multicultural battles on the streets of Southend. He has never once come up with any reasons and things to suggest how we deal with them as a community. It's only the ones that he feels were instigated by far-right racists. That just blows my mind. That's the thing that you've got to factor in. So whenever they decided to paint this narrative of the far-right racist thing, they always try to demonise the people that's protesting, and that's not a bad thing to do, actually, if you consider it, and if you actually read the room properly. Because if it was just a very, very small section of the community that felt that way, then by demonising them, it might help quell the amount of people protesting and causing violence. But they've not read the room that the people in the middle, the biggest bulk of society, feel the exact same. So when they went out with this narrative of baddies, far-right, extremists, all that nonsense, they're actually talking to the rest of the people, including myself, who have the same concerns as these people that are protesting. And that is a travesty. So maybe one day soon, maybe one day in history, for 10, 20 years from now, we'll find out the truth as to why the United Kingdom, its leaders, its media and its police all decided to treat one group protesting 3-4 years ago totally different from a group protesting today. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you've not already done so, please consider subscribing and hitting the notifications bell. But most importantly of all, unless you're one of these people that wants to talk bad of a good number of the great British public because they are concerned about the welfare and the safety of their communities. See everyone else, have a great day. Cheery bye now.